morning. I'm heading the Food and Nutrition Security team in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A little bit more on that later. And this is a very relevant event for me, for us, for the whole team, including our colleagues in Economic Affairs, because as I will also point out later, this is a joint affair. And so I'm very happy with this large turnout and also with what I've seen this morning already. So, and it's my task here to say something about partnerships. And as you can see on this first slide already, something is going on here. Not about the picture, that is just a standard picture that we will find in our default presentations from the time that our soccer team was still doing well. So not much more about that here today. It's on the right hand side, you see public and private between brackets, and I think we went over that already this morning. What exactly is a partnership? And just before I came up here, I had a little chat someone asking me, what is actually your definition of a partnership? Well, I do have several definitions of partnerships, but I bet that if I would have put out a survey here, I might have come up with at least 10 or 20 different definitions. So that is indeed something to talk about this morning and actually this whole day. What we experience as the Dutch government, but also I think as the Netherlands as a whole, people are coming to us asking us to partner with them. And just a little outline of the partnerships that we have signed just this year is 2 partnerships with the World Bank, one with the Global Practice Agriculture and one with the Global Practice Water. We have been partnering with the World Economic Forum on several topics, and now we are here with the CGIAR and all its institutions. So apparently there's something in the Netherlands that people like about us, and I think I should be honest to say it's not only the money. Because there is one definition of partnerships that we have heard in the past, and I think I sensed that in the room this morning as well, when we had the dragons up here. Is partner the same as donor? Is it the money that we bring to the table? I actually make it a habit to point out that I don't like the term donor anymore. In the past it was indeed capturing our role, but that's not the case anymore. Donor is perhaps one of the roles we can play. But my people and my colleagues here in the embassies, we make it a point not to be a donor per se. Yes, we may have some budget to spend, but there are other things that we bring in as well. And just referring to the partnership that we just signed with the World Bank, we made it a point to sign it between the Netherlands and the World Bank, not the Ministry and the World Bank, because, and this was also about knowledge, we are not the ones having that knowledge. It's you, it's research institutions, it's the private sector, it's NGOs. That is where the knowledge is, and we, in this case, as a government, we can play the broker role, for example. So that is just as a starter by this first slide. What do we see these days? And this is just a picture, and I'm afraid to get a little bit deeper into this because I have a room full of very experienced people here. And if you start Googling Nexus or global trends, global issues, there are thousands of pictures to capture this, and none of these is complete. But this refers just to where we are at the moment, and something that you all recognize. We are living in a complex world, and it's a world where we don't have one single solution for all the challenges that we see ahead. And this is just being illustrated by the document that will be signed next week in New York on the Sustainable Development Goals. They haven't been able to come up with 8 goals like they did in 2000. It's 17 now, and if you look a little bit closer, you see 165 underneath. So that is what is going on. There's a lot of positive in there because it's recognizing that we have challenges that we can't solve alone. For the first time in history, we see a document, we see objectives being formulated that are universal. recognizing also the roles of everybody around the world, being private sector, being public sector, being north, being south, whatever distinctions you can make, they're all in there, and that is, I think, a very positive development. Without much further ado on the global trends, this is what I do, making policy, being responsible for a policy response of the government. Yes, I am representing a government in the Netherlands, and specifically on our foreign relations and development cooperation relationships. The document that you see here is called A World to Gain. And that was the policy document written by the first ever Minister for Aid and Trade. That was unique or is unique in the history of the Netherlands. We have a minister that combines two portfolios, that in the past we had at least two ministers for that. And you see in this policy document these three main lines: poverty eradication, and coming from my perspective, getting to zero hunger. The economic growth part, which is again universal. It talks about us, but it also talks about others, and being responsible for a portion of the development cooperation budget that is working on agricultural development and food security. So it's also about farmers as entrepreneurs. So that is the second line. And the third line, and we're very open about that, we think that the Dutch private sector, first of all, should prosper, which was always very normal to say when you had a minister for trade, but now we have a minister for aid and trade, and sometimes you feel you have to be a little bit reluctant about that. I'm not. We would like to have the Dutch private sector prosper, but we also think, and we are convinced, that the Dutch private sector has a lot to bring, and knowledge is not. It's actually a parallel conclusion. Knowledge is not solely the prerogative of science or academia. Knowledge is everywhere, and as the Dragons this morning pointed out, a lot of knowledge is in the private sector, and many solutions come from the private sector. So we, coming from the public perspective, should be stupid not to use that. So that is where we get to the second part of the policy response, and that is the one I referred to before, the joint policy response by economic affairs being responsible for the agricultural policy of the Netherlands and development cooperation. Again, three lines: eradicate hunger and malnutrition, inclusive and sustainable agricultural growth, and ecologically sustainable food systems. In short, people, planet, profit. It has been said before as well, and that's a very logical summary. And in the policy document that we sent to Parliament just last year on this, there are two added points. The one is to reach these goals. Knowledge and research and capacity building are very important. In fact, in the policy document, the CGIAR is mentioned by name, which we do not do very often when we send something to Parliament. But in this case we thought, yes, we should do that, because this is a road we would like to travel. And when it comes to tackling the challenges that I spoke about before, without a global research system or without capturing the knowledge that is out there to get there, we won't get there. So that is one line, and it's a means to an end. Bear that in mind. And the second one is partnerships, and that is very much referring to what I said earlier. And these two are here together now, and together in this room today, because we would like to partner very much with the people that bring the knowledge to the table and make the combinations that can bring us further. So what do we see? Building on the global challenges that I mentioned before. We see global challenges. National borders are no longer relevant. That is stating the obvious here. Basically, my whole speech is stating the obvious, because I don't think I will say a lot many new things to you here today, because you are experts in partnering, but still at the same time, what I observed this morning is that language is an issue here, and we do not all speak the same language. So I do go over all these things because learning of each other also means accepting that the other speaks a different language and trying to understand. And that is one of the things that that I would like to address here and point that out clearly. But also going over this, we may even think of different patterns or different phenomena when I just state examples like these. A changing financial pattern, for example, for me that means that as a former donor institution, I see that ODA, official development assistance, in relevance is declining, just in the not necessarily in the absolute figure, but in relation to other financial flows in the world. We are not able to set the agenda just by the inputs of our finances any longer. So we need to think of different ways of setting the agenda, influencing the agenda, and it also means talking to the private sector and Unilever, for example, and say, how can we put some of the things that we think are important into your business? Well, with Unilever that's very easy, but because they even had a sustainable living plan before others were even using the word. But that goes for many companies and representatives in the private sector, is if we talk the same language and if we go the same direction, it may bring us further. That is also about the changing role of the public sector. It's also recognizing new markets. No longer talk in the old paradigm north-south, us telling them how to develop and what to do. No, referring back to the Minister for Aid and Trade, it's a different relationship. And our Minister Ploemen, when she first traveled, when she just started in her job, she traveled to Ethiopia, and she came back and she told us the little anecdote that she was in the room with the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, and she asked him what he thought of some development in New York in the Security Council. And the Prime Minister reacted a little bit surprised. He said, "You're the first one actually asking my opinion about a world affair." And that is, I think, in a nutshell, what is a change in mindset, a shift in perspectives. And all of a sudden you become equal partners. And you talk about the opportunities for you in that country and for the opportunity for the other country in your country and the mutual benefits that you can find. So that is important to realize. What is your perspective and how are you going to behave according to that? Finally, and that I think is the bullet talking about knowledge, innovation, sustainability as a comparative advantage. Here in the Netherlands we don't have cheap labor anymore. This is for 70% a country built on services. And one of the things that sets us out in the world is our capacity and ability to innovate, to combine, to form partnerships. And so that is also getting back to my first question, why do people come to us to partner with us? Well, this is one of the key reasons for that. People would like to partner with us because here in the Netherlands they find knowledge that you can't find anywhere else. And many representatives of that fine knowledge are here in the room. So we hope many little partnerships will be formed here today, but also in the years to come, because that is really what could have mutual benefits. I've heard the term this morning already, the Dutch diamond. Our way, and we coined this phrase, and I'm happy to see that others are using it as well, bringing together the four corners of the diamond: public, private, civil society, and science institutions. And it works. But does it work all the time? Not necessarily. That's another little anecdote. Is 10 years ago, the current Minister of Foreign Affairs, Bert Koenders, he was Minister for Development Cooperation in those days, and he came up with a new initiative, and I'll say this word for you, Amanda, Schokland. The Schokland agreement is what he initiated, and he said, well, I have a pot of money here, and I challenge you, anyone out there, to come up with a proposal that is a partnership. And that was interesting because there was a lot of enthusiasm. Many NGOs, businesses, academia joined forces and came up with beautiful business cases. But now, 10 years later, last year actually, we evaluated what had happened. And I'm not ashamed to say, because it's not a failure per se, but of those, I think, tens or 20s or maybe 40 partnerships that were brokered, 1/3 just failed outright. They just didn't get it right. They failed in the beginning, and that is what the evaluator said. This was not a successful partnership. The second batch, the second third, they were successful in a way because they made it to the end, and they reported on their expenses, and they gave out a very nice annual report, and that was it. After the end of the Schokland agreement, we've never heard of those partnerships again. The final third indeed was successful, and what they did was applying some of those lessons that I wrote down here, thinking ahead of what is actually what we want to achieve. Do we have a common goal? Do we recognize each other's roles, and do we respect that? And that meant stepping away from the traditional almost bias towards each other. Everybody has a definition in its head when we talk about an NGO or a government or whatever. Step away from that and think of what you mean by a meaningful partnership. And that means thinking of the impact that you want to have, building on a proper business case, and thinking of the financial inputs. By definition, they will be imbalanced, but not necessarily they have to come from the traditional sources. So you can think of different models to earn your inputs, etc., etc. So that was good to realize. So even a country that is priding itself in a century-old experience with partnerships, and we can go back 700 years for the first partnerships, where we had to work together to keep our feet dry. I don't know if you all realize it, but we are below sea level here. So, and there are successful partnerships out there that keep our feet dry here. So that is good to realize that you have to have that goal in mind and think of the ways to get there. So you can translate those lessons into several conclusions for this particular partnership that is on the table here today. I won't read them out all, but it's building on those lessons. Think of who you would like to involve, for what particular reason. And the Dragon's Den this morning was a very good example. Some of the pitches that were made got the response at what is it exactly what you would like to achieve. And so think ahead of that, but also use the other. You don't have to come to the table with a full-fledged business proposal. The essence of a partnership is that you do that together and that you use each other's strengths. So that was a little bit perhaps the flaw of a Dragon's Den, but it helps sharpen the mind. But in a real partnership, you would do that together in the privacy of a room and sit down and what is it what you would like to do? And how would you like to achieve that? And what can I bring in and what can you bring in? But there's an important distinction between a partnership as a means to an end or a partnership as an end in itself. And that is, and I'm definitely not saying that that's the case here. This partnership here to be signed this afternoon is a means to an end. And that, I think, brings me to my last slide. after I quickly go over this one, because to illustrate all of this, we have 4 beautiful presentations after I'll be silent. And those are examples from practice, so but definitely not 100% right, so we can still learn lessons. But more about that after me. The final one is, dear researchers in the room, but I think this goes for all of us here present. It's not about the, let us come slowly. We are motivated to be your partner, not for the inherent quality of your work, but because of your ability to make a difference. This partnership is a pathway to impact, and I hope we are on this pathway together. So thank you all.